world. Okay. Tonight, we're very excited to have our featured reader is Nadene LeCheminant. Nadine's poetry seeks to capture grief and the accumulating loss suffered by our planet's wildlife and flora, and joy at the abundant beauty and refuge still offered by the earth. Her debut novel, The Gates of Eden, was praised by the San Francisco Book Review as a well-researched, beautifully written historical novel. IndieReader said LeCheminant is a gifted storyteller, her prose elegant and finely crafted. So here is Nadene.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for coming. And thank you, Mark, for organizing this each week and for inviting me. I was real honored to be asked and also surprised. And this reading will use up all my good poetry, so this will probably be my first and last reading. And I want to make sure as I read, if you can't hear me in the back, just raise your hand, okay? I'm going to read several poems drawn from experiences earlier in my life, and then I'm going to read poems about nature and the earth. And I'll include several pieces that I've read here before at open mic night. This first poem is dedicated to my mother, who died far too young. It's called Cancer Ward. I, who scarcely know you now, once laid in your womb in the warm, wet darkness of utter protection, while you waited 9 heavy months, hoping I would be a girl to balance out your 2 boys, wanting me. When I was born, you held 10 tiny fingers in your dry housewife hands, bathed me in warm, slippery water. When I married, it was you who worried. Would he take care of me? Would I be treasured? Now you are leaving out the other door, into the sticky, wet shadow of morphine drips, hospital smells, terrible uncertainty. Come, lie in the womb of my arms. I will feed you milk and honey, bathe you in silent darkness. I will be your mother, hush you with our childhood lullabies. Here, take my hand, lie here gentle before the evening slips in. This next one is about how many of us were imprinted with the religion of our parents, and we grew up with their stories of faith. And this poem is about finding my way into my own understanding of the world. It's called Yes. 8 years old, and into the water I went with the others, my thin white gown floating to the surface, a priested man pushing me under, washing away my sins. As our breasts began to grow, the chastity interviews began, alone behind closed doors with priested men. Has anyone touched you? Did you touch them? Do you touch yourself? We didn't know what they meant, but they sent our wards to church archives anyway. At age 12, we had a record. At 16, men put their hands on our heads, prayed over us. Be modest, they said. Be pure. Smile. We made pom-poms for Mutual Improvement Association dances, stitched Hope chest samplers, learned which dress sack styles would emphasize our breasts without revealing too much. We knew our duty. Only a priested man could take us to the celestial kingdom. At age 21, I sat for the yearly interview behind closed doors in an empty church house. Have you touched a man? Did a man touch you? Will you give your body for childbearing? Will you obey the prophet, no matter what is asked. For the first time in my young life, I stopped smiling. I peered at the short man with the stiff suit and square jaw, as if seeing him for the first time. "No," I said, surprising myself. "No," he said, frowning. He went for reinforcements. And now a half circle of men formed, bore down on me with pale eyes, warned me about heaven and hell and the permanence of the thing, asked me again. "No," I said, looking at the door, blinking fast. "No," I sat trapped on the metal chair, twisting my foot around its leg, sweat rising on my upper lip. And then I heard it, an invitation. Somewhere far off in a place beyond that box of a church, I sensed there was a world full of desperation and tumult and joy. I would be a stranger there, but I would go. I rose on unsteady feet, walked down the long dark hall, heart banging against lungs. I pushed open the heavy door, closed my eyes, and breathed. I sat on the grass, felt the canyon wind tease my neck and lift the edge of my skirt. "Yes," I said, "yes." So, and you don't want to, thanks for talking, but you can just wait till the end.
I think that's the audience choice.
Many of us have tried to reclaim ourselves and reclaim our life at midlife or earlier or later, and to get back on track toward the life that we meant to create instead of the life that we have. And sometimes that involves making changes, and sometimes those changes are significant. So this is about my midlife transition. It's called The Other Side of 50. At 49, I began to throw things away. Neglected books, worn out clothes, a dead computer, love letters that no longer serve their original purpose. And then, since the garbage can is wide open, I take a gamble and throw out my job, my home, my marriage, especially my marriage. On a warm July evening, I board the Greyhound heading west through the sage until the setting sun is just a splash of molten gold across the black hills. "Where are you headed?" the stranger in the next seat asks. A dot on the map in Oregon, I tell him. He fingers a religious tract, sizes me up. "Do you want to go to heaven?" I hug my earthly possessions to me, traveler's checks, the map of a strange city, the address of an unseen apartment. "Yes," I say, "yes, I do want to go to heaven." All the while thinking, just 24 hours and 800 miles are all it takes to separate me from everything I know. Outside the window, the twilight sky fills with stars. "You can be reborn," the stranger says, all fervent with godly conviction. His words fall over me like manna, deliverance, emancipation, heaven. I am plight. I take his tract, put it with the map that tells me where I'm headed. I'm so tired. Tired of love that feels like war. Tired of loud silences in the house. Exhausted from exhaustion. The Greyhound shifts gears and chugs uphill in the night, and above its fast drone, I think, perhaps I should be afraid, but I'm not. Perhaps I should be heartsick, but I'm not. I didn't see eye to eye with the stranger's last day's talk, but he did have a good point about one thing. Perhaps one can be reborn. The tender moon hangs in the sky. The dark hills roll by. One by one, sleep claims the passengers on the bus, but I am wide awake as some wild new religion rises inside, every mile bringing me closer to rebirth. So this is a poem I wrote. I'd gone up to Olympic National Park to hike among those ancient big trees. And this is called Night Migration. Hundreds of geese pass overhead in the night, calling to each other, their instinct, a kind of wisdom that guides them home. I need that wisdom now. I need a refuge, a place to breathe, a place to rest. For animals, it's instinctual. They go about their lives unburdened by the ceaseless chatter of resentment and confusion and anger and anxiety. Their stories are simpler. For humans, it's more difficult. We complicate our days with endless wind-up storytelling. Let me be like the birds, calling overhead in the night sky, sure of their direction, even in the dark. So this next poem is about mushrooms, not the kind that you use for cooking. And I want to emphasize that the unspoken rule in the poetry night is that what is said in the poetry annex stays in the poetry annex. This is called mushrooms. Last summer, I ate dried mushrooms and then took a sunset walk on the beach. Out at sea, waves crashed and broke. Seabirds cried and swooped. Water flamed into luminescence, and shore pools became fonts of ocean wisdom. Ripples of wave on sand, on light, opened the gates of heaven. And I walked through, tingling with the pink and gold of setting sun and some sort of fluid movement upward, like a bird. The mushrooms were my teacher, telling me there are more open doors than we know, more light than we see. We just need to walk through. We just need to let what we embrace us. The world is waiting, leaves with their patterned veins, sand with its tiny glassy beam, lichen that opens into miniature canyons, and moss as soft as feathers and clouds. So, how many of you were here during the heat dome of 2020? Yeah, it was 117 degrees in Salem, and I was terrified. I was terrified not only of that day, that temperature, but I was terrified of the future. This is a poem about that. It's called Heat Dome over Oregon. Hundreds of baby hawks fell from the sky this week. They called out through the endless afternoon, pleading for relief. And then the little things tipped themselves off the edge of the nest, fleeing the heat. The hawks were too young to fly, and so they didn't take wing with the grace of their parents. They didn't soar, they simply dropped, landing with thuds on the hard ground below, some alive, some dead, some halfway between. Mangled skeletons and tiny bruised lungs, now they're just feathered debris, part of the unholy exhibit of the sixth mass extinction. Can chicks feel fear? Do they understand dread? This season the land is so dry it doesn't even cry when it burns. At what point do they just give up and drop? Their mothers wanted to shelter them, but how can a mother hawk or human, save its young when the world is on fire. This is called A Peculiar Wind. A peculiar wind is sweeping through me, blowing out the clutter of calendar markings. Ahead is the hushed expanse of my extinction. I need to practice stillness. I'm closer to death than to birth. My body tells me to move more slowly. My mind tells me to create space on each side of each breath, and then let go of the space. And so I untangle the abundance of an abundant life. Simplicity is what I long for. Afternoons in the hammock, listening to the bees who make hardly any sound at all. So several years ago, a friend and I took a beautiful train trip to Banff National Park in the Canadian Rockies. And while we were in Banff, I read a news story about an incident involving a grizzly bear. And this was not an isolated incident, but it was an ongoing problem with bears, trains, and train tracks. And I realized that I was part of the problem because I'm human. And because as humans we've built out our infrastructure, our lives, so extensively and left very little room for wildlife. Can you hear me in the back? Okay. This is called Incident near Banff National Park. The Rocky Mountaineer train ran fast through grizzly country, taking luxury passengers on the trip of their lifetime. If we're lucky, we were told, we would see a bear, perhaps even some cubs. And so we waited at the windows, sipping on espressos and morning martinis, hoping to catch a glimpse of wildness. But in those mountains, we were the ones who were untamed, barreling through a home that had belonged to wolves, cougars, wolverines, and bears for millennia. In the end, we didn't see a bear, but a bear saw us. She was browsing on fat dandelions at the edge of the track. When their train rushed through, wheels screeching, passengers' cars clattering, she raced up the hillside, all four legs pumping, heart racing. She reached the crest of the hill where a car, racing down the Trans-Canada Highway, knocked her to Kingdom Come. Her two cubs, nose deep in dandelions, were slow on the uptake. They sat up and sniffed the air. They followed her trail up the hill and nosed her body. And then they waited. By mid-morning, she hadn't moved and never would. At noon, lunch was served, wild Alaskan salmon with freshly harvested greens, with a hint of cranberry and goat cheese. And we rushed on, in our cocoon, faces at the window, humans in the 21st century being human, taking and taking and taking without even realizing how much was already gone. So many poets have a poem that is their anthem. And this poem says what they most want to say about the thing that is closest to their heart. And this is that poem for me. It's about an experience I had 50 years ago when I went on a month-long survival trip. We walked more than 200 miles across the southern Utah desert. And back in those days, that was remote wilderness. We didn't see anyone. And the last week, we were able to spend a week by ourselves on the, each one of us alone in the Escalante River canyons. I bet you were wondering what this prop was about. This is the blanket that I carried on my back. I rolled up a toothbrush, a poncho, a change of underwear, and a jacket. Strapped it on, and that was the only thing I had. That was my belongings for a month. We were not allowed to bring a sleeping bag, a tent, matches, or a canteen. And for water, we had a sawed-off soda can, and every time we saw a river, we would run for the water and dip it in, and then we carried this little can across the desert. The program closed down shortly after I went. For dinner, we usually made ash cakes, and these are quite delicious. You mix flour, ashes from the fire that we started ourselves for leavening, and river water. And then you knead the dough, and it's this ugly gray color, and you put it out flat on the rocks to bake. And when I came back, I weighed 91 pounds. But I loved this trip. It was a glorious adventure. I was 19, I was immortal, I was so strong, and I could walk forever. And this trip was one of the touchstones of my life. And the reason it was is because I felt so uninsulated from nature. Everything about us as humans, we have buffers between us and the natural world. And there was no buffer. We were part of the natural world. And I felt so open and raw and in awe of creation. And I spent decades after trying to recapture that sense of intimacy with the earth. So this is called A Walk in the Wilderness. We began walking as the red sun slipped below the purple butte, along ridges and dry riverbeds, under a sharp slice of moon, silence as loud as the crickets. On foot, the desert was immense and smelled of pinyon and sage. We carried blanket rolls, slept in a row of S shapes, breast against back, hugging warmth. We walked to the last mountains on the map, arrived to tumult. Thunder roared across the heavens, lightning lashed twisted rock, purple clouds unleashed torrents of rain. I watched the storm with dread, frightened of the cold, the damp, night on a mountaintop without a tent. But the mule deer weren't afraid, or the owls, or snakes. So I took off my boots, spread my arms, threw off my humanness, stepped barefoot up the trail in the rain, like a deer, like a mountain lion, like a wet coyote. On the 10th day, we found an abandoned stable, ducked out of the wind, stripped down to nothing, set in a circle on the musty hay. We sang like our human ancestors did and told long stories around the fire. Ah, the stories. Rain howled outside, thunder cracked. We talked philosophy, we talked religion, we talked oranges and scones and cherry pie. On the 15th day, we killed and gutted a sheep, hung strips on branches, swatted away flies in the scorching sun. We were parched, hungry, broken, whole. The sheep looked at me as she died. 200 miles, flint for fire, poncho for rain, rabbit brush trails leading nowhere, blankets spread across gravelly sand under the wandering stars. What I learned. I never really heard crickets before, never heard rain or wind. If I understand a single stone, I will understand everything. On the 23rd day, I camped alone by the bank of the Escalante River. I arranged arrowheads along a ledge, took off my hat, my shirt, my pants, sunned on a rock by the muddy brown water. flash flood came in the afternoon. Water rushed down sandstone cliffs. I raced barefoot down the sudden river, stumbled on rock shards, grabbed boots, toothbrush, potatoes, onions. I moved camp, dried my blanket, shaped a sand bed in a half cave. I scooped gritty water from the river, mixed ashes with flour, kneaded dough, laid flatbread on rocks near the fire. That night, the moon rose in the dark blue, familiar and silver and ripe. The owl upstream, the coyote downstream. I was an empty cup, waiting to be filled with moon, stars, barks, and howls. Water flowing in the desert carved the canyon where I slept. I knew I would never again be as filthy, as blistered, tired, never as cold, never as entwined with jackrabbits. What I learned: one can get lost in the desert. One can get lost in the world. I had been homesick for wildness. I had been homesick for myself. On the last night in the wilderness, I steeped tea leaves with honey. The driftwood burned with spicy sweetness. I lifted my head to the stars, drank the muddy water, drifted away like smoke. So, I have one last poem. We live in a country where the government is disappearing people, primarily people of color, but they're also disappearing words. And that's because they know the power of language. This is a poem about just some of the many words that have been banned from government websites, from publications, even from signs on national parks. This is called Rise Up. This morning, climate change disappeared, with its ability to inflict grief and trauma, especially for oil and coal executives. Climate change is wiped clean. What a relief. Yesterday, it was gender. Gone. No trace anywhere on the 10,000 government web pages where it once resided. The Google search thing? Nope, doesn't get you there. And if you want to submit a federal grant, word it carefully. Male, man, and men are good to go. Female, woman, and women, not permitted. Something about diversity. In this time of metaphorical book burnings, let us pay tribute to the words that have been banned. Activism, belong, black, clean energy, climate crisis, climate science, community, COVID-19, cultural heritage, disability, elderly, environmental justice, equality, gay, hate, Hispanic, inclusive, identity, indigenous community, justice, race, pollution, prejudice, sex, vaccines, water quality, and that troublesome woman. When the government begins to disappear words, the poets will step up. Their stanzas shouting what's real, what's true, what's compassionate. Sure in their responsibility to the people and the earth, their pens are poised. In Missouri, Michigan, Maine, and Montana, their desktops are booting up, their blank sheets are waiting. The deluge of reborn words will appear, like trickles, like streamlets, one from this poet, one from that, flowing into swift-moving currents, and then into a mighty river until, as one black preacher envisioned, justice rolls down like waters, Deluded crusaders come and go, destroying, pillaging, burning it all down with their swords and guns and executive orders. The poets, quiet in their garrets, almost invisible as they pen their holy river of words, the poets will outlast them all. I don't have any poetry chapbooks for Sal, because I don't have any chapbooks, but I do have copies of my novel, The Gates of Eden, and this is a coming-of-age story inspired by the life of my great-great-grandmother. And she was in Victorian England, and as a girl she immigrated to Utah in the 1850s. And shortly after her arrival, she became the young child, polygamous bride of a man who was almost 4 decades her senior. The story explores the tension between faith and doubt, and it explores the mysteries of fear and love in a girl who's trying to reclaim her life. And you can buy a copy in the back from my husband, Dick, for $10, or you can purchase a more expensive copy from Amazon or one of the online secondhand stores like Thrift Books, which is a great store. So thank you again to Mark for organizing these readings. And thank you, Mark Witt, for bringing the beautiful flowers. And thank you all for coming and supporting the Salem Poetry Project.
Isn't that terrific?
Yes.
That's great. That's great. So, okay, on the back table, we've got the novels. We got 2 sign-up sheets. One's for you open mic and one's for the mailing list. So if you want to read in the open mic, you sign up on the open mic list. And if you want to be on the mailing list, you sign up on the mailing list. Then there's all kinds of food back there. There's cookies and pie. There's some pumpkin bread. Eat the pumpkin bread. I don't want to take it home. And there's some wine back there, so drink the wine, because I don't want to drink that home. And so we'll take a break for a little while and then come back to the open mic.